The EU Act is here, and we all know that EU Act is all about risk-based approach towards application. That means based on the risk an application carries, the number of requirements applicable would also change. So how do you manage risk in context of EU Act? We had a wonderful panel recently, me along with Caro Robson, who is actively involved with governments on advocating for AI and privacy and security concerns, and also Alessandro Mauro, who is a risk professional. And we had an interesting chat moderated by my friend Saurabh Gupta, who kindly agreed to do this. He's also an entrepreneur and an active technologist in field of privacy and security and even AI. So we had a wonderful conversation around managing risk in context of EU AI Act, and in this episode we go through that and understand managing risk.
Hello, and welcome to the Fit for Privacy podcast with Punit Bhatia. This is the podcast for those who care about their privacy. Here, your host, Punit Bhatia, has conversations with industry leaders about their perspectives, ideas, and opinions relating to privacy, data protection, and related matters. Be aware that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are not legal advice. Let us get started.
And now we get into the second part, and I welcome to the stage first our moderator Saurabh Gupta, who's a dear friend and also a serial entrepreneur. He's been active in the space of creating technology or Salesforce based technology for compliance with privacy, security, and AI legislations. And he's very, very active. So, welcome, Saurabh.
Thank you so much for having me, Puneet. It's a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have you. And we are also going to have somebody who's been working with the governments and also in the government and in the Information Commissioner's Office of Jersey, called Caro Robson. So, welcome, Caro. Very happy to have you.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
And then, as we are talking about how can we miss somebody with a vast expertise on risk and who has been a risk professional for, I think, decades now and has advised, worked in companies to set up risk frameworks. Because if we talk about EU AI Act, we also want to understand how does the act flow and how do our current risk management practices allow us to leverage them. We have Alessandro Mauro. Welcome, Alessandro.
Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure and an honor to take part to this interesting conversation.
Thank you so much. And now I hand over to my dear friend Saurabh so that now I can switch to panel and I can also talk a bit.
Thank you so much, Puneet, and nice to see you again, Alessandro and Caro. Thanks everyone who's joining us today. The thing that's really interesting is you have a panel with extremely diverse experience, and you have people, all of who are needed for these things to become real. You have folks who represent the governance point of view, the ICO office's perspective, and some of those areas from a policy making perspective. You have folks who are doing risk management for a living and who want to look at it from a risk perspective of how large and mid-sized businesses can address some of these things and make sure that they're compliant while also balancing business imperatives. And then, of course, you have Puneet, who's one of the facilitators, authors, thinkers in this space and spent a lot of time in data privacy and now AI. And finally, I come from a very implementation part of the world. I'm one of those people who gets handed down these things of like, go make this happen. And so you will see a juxtaposition of how you see these new laws come into place. What's the kind of churn around it that mentally happens with a variety of different perspectives. And so I'm looking forward to how we move forward. So before we can start, Puneet, do you want to give us a really quick recap from your session one? I attended a part of it, but I think it may be useful to set the stage for our folks. And then anybody who's interested, I'm sure it's gotten recorded and you can get a copy.
Sure. So we talked about in the session one, we didn't go deep into EI Act, but we got into why did we need the EU AI Act. And one of the things we talked about is AI is not like any other systems, because we often say systems and automation was there for long and AI is just an extension of it. No, it's not just an extension. When we talk about generative or what we call the discriminative AI, the challenge is enormous. and it creates a lot of social, moral, ethical, political, job levels, and many levels of challenge. And to address that, a law was needed. And there we have this law, the EUI Act, which does not impose all the requirements into all the systems, but says, let's take a risk based approach, that is, grade systems into risks. So we will prohibit certain systems, and for most systems, there will be no requirements. And for the remaining systems, there will be transparency obligations if they are in the limited risk. And if they are in the high risk category, all the requirements around explainability, the data quality management, data governance, and a whole lot of requirements that are being talked about EOA Act, then they apply. So it's not holistic application saying take it or leave it. It's a risk-based approach, and that's where our panel comes in. And another thing we talked about is it's not be and we have and it's the be all end all solution. It is going to be allowing you to do the risk management or AI related requirements on AI systems. But in terms of the copyright infringement, liability infringements, or even the IP infringements, the other laws will also need to be upgraded, because we all know if Palmolive or Unilever builds a product, there are a lot of checks, a lot of laws that apply on those products. So similar, we need to think of in the software world, how do we manage that? And last but not the least, we also discussed that if you're thinking of the EUI Act compliance, the time is now. Don't think it's 2 years or 6 months and you can start. We all have the lessons from GDPR. We thought there are 2 years, and then in the last mile, we learned it's not enough, and we're still working on it. So that's in brief. Of course, if people are interested in understanding the EUI Act, there are a lot of information available on our website, and they can take advantage of that.
That's a great recap. Thank you, Puneet. So, with that, I'll ask a question from Caro. Caro, I know you come from an incredibly diverse background and a lot of seasoned point of view on some of these laws and regulations. So, when you think about the EU AI Act, can you talk a little bit about what it means to businesses, and also maybe get a little more detail into what Puneet was mentioning around the risk-based approach?
Certainly, yes. So it's at the moment it's a 459-page tome that businesses are sort of staring at and looking at and wondering what on earth this thing is. So let's get into some of the context and kind of take a step back, and then a little bit of a deep dive, I think, in some of the definitions, because I think that's where the real meat of this is, and it's not always obvious from reading hundreds of pages of this legislation. So at a high level, it is EU legislation that is both product safety legislation, which is kind of a different approach to the other thing it's doing, which is fundamental rights legislation, and it's free market legislation. So you have this kind of dual approach of protecting rights, but also taking a product safety approach. And there'll be a lot of technical regulations coming under the regulation itself, the Act itself, that go into more detail because it's product safety. And it's protecting people in the EU from harms. And the harms that are being protected from are really vast: economic, social, physical, psychological, environmental, and also harms to fundamental rights. That's kind of important because that informs the understanding of risk that the Act takes. And it can be quite different to some other definitions of risk in, say, financial services legislation, or to the business risks around AI that we're going to talk about in a moment. So the risk-based approach at a high level is the number of regulatory obligations you have to comply with depend on how you use a system, and to a lesser extent, there are elements of how a system itself is built. And what risk it poses to those harms, that broad range of harms to people and environment and things, depends on the level of obligations you need to comply with. So that's a high level on the Act. The crux of all of this, I think, is what is AI? We're all sat here talking vastly about AI. What actually is it in the Act? Because I think if you can get your head around it, for me, that's the key to understanding not just the Act itself, but the business risks involved with AI and how that's different to traditional software and products. So I have an extract in front of me, Article 3. An AI system is a machine-based system designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy, may exhibit adaptiveness after deployment. and for explicit or implicit objectives, infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. So I hope that's clear. No, so it's a really difficult definition to get your head around, but there is a word in there buried in that meaty, dense definition that's doing all the work and is really important. And the word I want to give a huge shout out to and to champion is the word infers, because that's the difference. That's the key. It's the word infers. It's a system that infers outputs. So what does infers mean? I hear you ask. Well, it's not defined in the regulation. Recital 12 gives us a little bit of a hint. So we hear that a key characteristic is about the ability to infer. The capability refers to processing, the process of obtaining the outputs and deriving models from inputs or data, and the capacity of an AI system to infer transcends basic data processing, enables learning, reasoning, and modeling, which is lovely and sounds fantastic, but doesn't help me as a non-technical person. So I turn to business and industry, and a wonderful engineer called Jeffrey Erickson at Oracle has a fantastic definition, which is AI inference is when an AI model that has been trained to see patterns in curated data sets begins to recognize those patterns in data it has never seen before. That for me is a light bulb moment, because that's the difference. These systems have been built and trained on data that has been gathered, scraped, collected, curated at vast environmental cost, human cost. Thousands, millions of people label and tag this data, but that's the data that is then informing the outputs from the end user. So it's different to a normal system where you would input all your data into a GRM system and then the machine would apply some rules. Now the outputs are coming from other data that you've not seen, isn't from you, and you've not got oversight of. And I think once you appreciate that about the AI supply chain, that's where applying the ACT to your systems, but also applying basic risk management in a business context, starts to take hold. That's a very long description, so I'm going to stop talking and let other people come in. But that for me is the key. AI is about where you get an output from data that isn't just what you put into it.
Yeah, I think this is great. One of the takeaway for me from this is really there are two aspects of it. One is the product safety, and the second part of it is the fundamental rights that we want to protect for, at least for EU AI Act, for the EU residents, right? And this is great to know. And I know you talked about risk. I'm curious, Puneet, to hear from you if you want to dive a little bit deeper into what's the risk, what's the classification of risk when we think about the EU AI Act.
Okay, at a broad level, risk is a very varying topic, but from a product perspective or AI system perspective, combining it with the fundamental rights risk, what we look at is four categories of risk. So, one is when an AI system does not pose or pose a very limited set of risk to individuals and freedom of individuals. So, let's say a transcription service, for example, then we would say that's a low or medium risk and it does not have an obligation. Now, I don't say transcription service is going to be rated as that. I'm just saying, for example, then there are no obligations. But then, as soon as you say there's an Alexa and she can interpret something on your behalf, and now you see, I already said she while it's a technology. So I'm already starting to infer AI as human beings. And that's where it can create some risk. And there we say there are transparency obligations. So limited risk, and we can create transparency obligation, meaning explaining to people what is it, what does it do, and keeping a responsible check. But then we get into some major risk or high risk systems. Let's say we are going to do some scanning of your voice and make a judgment, are you having cold or not, then make a recommendation to you saying, hey, you're sounding not okay, is everything okay, do you want some me to order medicines for you? Now that's a risk, because if I'm doing it in context of my voice, I don't know what context it will interpret. In those cases, you have major requirements. For example, the data governance testing, penetration testing, quality checks, ability to log everything, maintain the logs, technical documentation, even the risk management practice, and also conformity assessment and conformity check, and even a registration with authorities. So that's a long list of requirements, to say the least. But then we also get into high risk, which can impact the society at large or make decisions for the country on that level. So those are completely forbidden systems. So those are not allowed. But if you look at it in terms of 80-20 rule, I think 80% of your current systems would fall into the category of limited or no obligations. And maybe 20% would have the full application. That's my judgment of current systems, so not the future. And it's just a judgment. And then maybe 1% or 2% of systems would fall into the prohibitive category. So that's how we are looking at risk, and it's still being evaluated. Still people are looking to map into which category of systems map where and all. Like recently I was talking to a healthcare company and they do AI. So if we apply Caro's definition of AI, it fits in. But they say, oh no, our system is offline, so there's no AI. And it has nothing to do with offline or online. The simple definition is based on the learnings the system has, does it apply itself to new data and make that judgment? It's the inference aspect of it. So then it gets into the risk category.
True. I think that's an excellent overview. So my takeaway is, again, like you basically talked about four categories of risk, with the prohibitive at the very top, which is probably military systems and things like that. But typically, back to your 80-20 comment, if I'm on the business side of this, if you're crunching data and you're not driving autonomous cars or launching rocket ships for it, and if you're just maybe summarizing, call transcripts or other kind of business information, summarizing emails, doing analysis on it, doing sentiment detection, intent detection, things like that, those kind of analysis. What I've heard is that there is a possibility that they may fall in the sort of low risk to moderate, depending on the potential of these things to do harm, right? That's kind of what you're trying to balance as a business person in the room.
Absolutely.
Right. So speaking of risk, I know, Alessandro, you've spent a significant amount of your career in risk management across a wide diversity of industries, and particularly with an emphasis on commodities and other markets. So I'm very curious to hear from your perspective, how do you manage risk in general, and particularly in context of the EU AI Act?
Yes. Yeah. So talking about risk management, we in front something big and huge that is often scaring us. So it's AI, and this is why it's so big that European Union came with this draft of act, and also United Nations, with the UN AI body, decided also to. The nation decided to have a body on AI, and they came at the end of last year with the first draft, which we commented as a global AI association, and I wrote the part about risk management. So my point of view is that we shouldn't. It's a big challenge. It's something big that can be really a revolution, but we shouldn't forget from where we are coming and what is risk management. That human beings have always been doing risk management. It's about the instinct of survival. We do risk management because we want to survive, and this has been on for millenniums. Okay, is our evolution. But then, if coming closer to us, like 30, 40 years ago, we started putting in place rules or best practice for guidelines for risk management. It became a discipline. And so at the beginning of the year 2000, 2002, the Institute of Risk Management came with their risk management standards. Then in 2009, ISO, the International Standardization Organization, came with this standard framework for implementing risk management, came known as ISO 31000. and so on. COSO is a leader in enterprise risk management, and so on. So what is the message here? We have frameworks, we have guidelines. We shouldn't forget these. Many people have been worked on these frameworks, and a limited number of organizations are using these approaches to address risk. So my view is that we should use these approaches in terms of in front of also AI. So if I give more content, ISO 31000 put all the process for assessing a risk or addressing a risk. So you start with the risk assessment. You have to do risk identification. After you identify, you have to do the risk analysis. Then you do the risk evaluation. And then when your framework is clear, then you can go to risk treatment. What is my risk response? And then you have all the basis. And I feel we have to do all these steps. And okay, the act that we are talking about goes in this direction, like is a risk-based approach. But then it's still in theory, still gives examples. But then you have to decline, you have to apply in your reality. It can be an NGO, can be a business, and so on. So especially on the risk identification part, we have to be very, very attentive. Where really is where you put the foundations. Is the first step, and you know, risk identification is adapted. Is adapted to the kind of risk. I have done a lot of market risk management in the past, so there you have to study the contracts, come with exposures, understanding how they impact your bottom line. Another case which is even more interesting, probably, and closer to AI is the cyber risk. You know, on cyber risk, one of the main used approach for risk identification is not to understand your systems, how they are connected, your IT system, and so on. It's actually to do white hacking, so to do penetration testing. So you pay someone to enter in your systems and try to see if they can be broken. No? So it's very for me fascinating. No? And actually it's about something like it's a black box. And so this is why I'm making this example, because then AI is a black box. And we see we put something in the prompt and we get the results. And then we don't know if there is hallucinations and so on. So I don't want to go too much in details, but this is my message. Before we really go and say what is the risk treatment, the risk response, should be avoid, should transfer the risk, or we transfer the risk, we should first of all do a proper risk identification of these new source of risk.
I think that's a very interesting perspective you bring, particularly that AI is a black box. I think you said out loud that's something that I speak to a lot of organizations every week because I'm on the sort of AI solution side of the story, and I think a lot of people on the other side of the Zoom call probably have the same question in their mind that we are dealing with.
I don't know if sorry if interrupting you, if you agree or not is a black box or not, but then you start reading articles from the gurus. The gurus don't make names, big companies, and they try to understand the behavior of AI by prompting. By you prompt in this way or another, they found out that you prompt more aggressively, so the answer is more prudent from the system. It means that nobody's going the machine and checking the neural network. You're trying to go input and output. So all the middle is black box. So this is why I say black box.
True. No, it's very well said. So that brings up another interesting question, and Caro, I'm going to ask that from you and see what your thoughts are. In line with what Alessandro is saying, there is definitely a lot of discomfort or unease with AI. Its black box nature, its potential to hallucinate, induce bias, flat out just really, really convincingly lie. So there's a lot of things that we have heard, and these are like, what are the challenges? What are the real world challenges for businesses who are thinking about using AI from your perspective?
I think, first of all, idea of it being a black box, what I call the black box mentality. I agree, and I've read a lot of scientific and data science papers where even the people developing these models are struggling to understand quite how some of the parameters and the links are being made. But I think a black box mentality is one of our biggest risks, because you can lift the lid on that box to an extent. So a lot of companies are publishing safety documents. In the case of OpenAI, they publish the safety paper and then release the product anyway, but still, a lot of companies are publishing information on how they work. And this is where I think the AI Act, could actually be really helpful for end users, because whilst you might be subject to obligations, and it's a very product safety based act, it's very much looking at what is the risk of this product or use harming the public. But it does place obligations on providers, the people who provide foundation models, on distributors, on deployers who might be your B2B customers, around transparency, around explainability. And so the Act itself might be really helpful in helping you unpick that supply chain. When certifications, if they come in and regulations are being drafted to look at working with certification bodies, maybe a CE mark or an ISO standard, if these things come in, that's going to be super helpful at identifying and looking at certified risks and products where there have been metrologists have actually gone in and looked at how these systems work. So I think the practical challenge is understanding that supply chain as best you can, understanding that at the start of this supply chain is the collection of a huge amount of data, unlawfully, I'd suggest, from a data protection perspective, from a copyright perspective. It's unclear where a lot of this has come from. There are labor rights issues. So the millions of people around the world who are employed to tag, label, sift, vet, check this data. The International Labour Organization is doing a lot of interesting work on this, actually. But there are supply chain issues there around labor rights, the legalities, and of course, issues with the product itself. If AI hallucinates, it's very convincing at telling you it's right. So understanding some of the risks, the safety briefing notes of the products themselves, I think is very important, and understanding all of these things in the workplace and the environment as to how you're using an AI system and when you're using an AI system. So mapping your products, making sure that you have a policy or at least awareness of when your employees are just hammering the annual report into ChatGPT because it's the night before it's due and all your financials have just gone off to San Francisco and OpenAI just because it's too late to draft the report. Being on top of those things, I think, are important. And really, I think overall, my advice would be treat these as you would any other risks. These are supply chain risks. They are product risks, they're legal risks, they're compliance risks, they're communication risks. So break down the chain, look at where you're using this tech, look at the controls that you have, governance, making sure your board's aware. I can talk about some class action lawsuits that are very interesting where boards are being personally liable for this. Look at contracts with vendors. It's hard to get clarity. The Act might help that, but try to talk to your vendors. Try to make sure you've got policies rolled out, that your employees are aware of it. Make sure that staff understand when AI is being used, how it's being used, and treat these things as any other business risk. Escalate it, put it on the risk register, make sure that it's been assessed by your risk management framework, make sure people are aware, mitigations are in place, and actions are carried out. And I think those kind of basic risk management tools, if you're brave enough to try to prise the lid on the black box and have a look under the hood, as Anke Valkin was just saying, that I think is the way to approach this from a business risk perspective. I realize that's a different way of looking at risk than the risk-based approach in the Act as to which requirements apply. But from a business side, just be brave, ask questions, and use, as Alessandro was saying, your existing risk management tools.
That's a great overview of this. I was thinking while you were talking about this that later today I'll be driving for about 6 hours, out of which probably 4.5 the car's going to drive itself. Just so you know. And that one of the things, the reason I mentioned that specifically is because I'm not sleeping at the wheel, right? Like we are in the United States, at least Tesla is, you have autopilot, you can run it on it, and it's got like billions of miles logged against it. but the risk is 100% there. I'm just not going to be playing Wordle on my phone while it's driving itself. And I am definitely having my hands on the steering. But I think it's a good metaphor for where the businesses need to go. I think these are good capabilities to look at, but you absolutely want a human in the loop. You definitely want to make sure that you are looking at the source of these training, and the supply chain, as you put it. I've never thought of software from a supply chain perspective. I would have thought of coffee that way, but I totally see your point. Very legitimate of how this data has been aggregated, curated, humanly reviewed, tested. There is probably a lot of concerns in a variety of different areas. Having said that, though, I am aware that there are organizations like Anthropic that has Claude, which they are that have actually gone, far and beyond just publishing papers, and they at least proclaim that they're doing a lot of work in this space to make sure that it is a fair trade AI, if you will. But I'm curious if you have any following comments to that.
I was just going to say there's fascinating research on this, and in terms of the human labor cost, your self-driving car, that data is probably going to people in Madagascar or Brazil or the Philippines to hand label and look at your images. So there is information out there. What I would say, though, on all these points, from bringing us back to the EU AI Act, the Act is clear that it is without prejudice to the Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, the upcoming Platform Workers Directive, which we're expecting, to the GDPR, to the e-commerce directive. How these things will interplay isn't clear, because these are big questions and complex questions. This is very much about fundamental rights of people in the EU, and it's about product safety of how these technologies are used. However, the harms they're talking about are environmental, social. There are many people in these supply chains, and many of the mines producing these precious minerals are in the EU. But how these things will interact with Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, the environment program that the EU is pursuing, isn't clear. So what I would say to organizations is, as you're looking across your supply chain, bear in mind all of your legal and compliance risks, and your reputational risks, and your ESG risks, and your reporting on ESG at the board. So bear this one act it is horizontal, but it's not a silver bullet that's going to solve everything. It's one element of your broader risks, because all those other laws still apply. That's
Very,
what I
very well put. Totally agree with you. Very well put. So that brings us another interesting question, and I'm going to ask Alessandro this because, again, risk management. Alessandro, can you maybe talk about any case studies, any incidents that exemplify some of the challenges that Caro mentioned, and what would have been an alternate way to address them?
Yeah. So, it's kind of, they're not public, so it's, people are keep this kind of confidential. What I can say is like, this is telling, and Punit clarified this, the risk management approach, and there are things high risk, lower risk, and so on. So this is already a guide for companies, because for high risk, for example, is like technology applied to employment management, like CV sorting software, and so on. So this is already clarified as high risk, so has to be very, very careful. So a company can assess this risk and find the risk response, like, okay, I don't want any risk on this. I will not do any CV sorting with artificial intelligence. Fine. So I say the AI Act is complex, but also gives a direction of what we should do in terms of applications. But what I'm seeing, talking with friends, people in the network, my network is especially in the commodity trading business. The application that they're trying to put in place is about business, is about creating value, or if you want to say more value, where I mean financial value, okay, money. So it's a business, but it's not special. It's a business where we have more and more data. like many other business. These movements of commodities are more and more tracked. They are digital. We are collecting, systems are collecting a huge amount of data. So there is a big incentive, a big interest in applying AI. And I mean, like data, like weather, about shipping routes, about commodities moving from one place to another, and so on. It's huge. So, and also a limitation of humans, like humans cannot digest all this data. So a lot of effort is done in applying artificial intelligence to this data, and as we say, infer patterns, find a way to create financial value, see something that other people didn't see. It's like, and then my point is, then it can become, by using it is a big opportunity, but also is a big risk, because it can be a risk bigger than like going against one of these regulation in the AI Act. Like I say, okay, I want to avoid CV sorting risk with AI. I don't do this. I use HR humans to do CV sorting. Fine. I have the categories, and I will try to follow these in the act. When I apply instead to really to business intelligence, you can if you do something wrong, can be really costly. Okay, and you really you can take wrong decisions. I go in this market, I buy this commodity, and then I lose a lot of money. So my point is that, and there, there is it's you. You don't have an EU Act behind. It's just your company is investing time and money in artificial intelligence. So these you should be concerned. As we say, you need checkpoints. When you are getting data out of the AI system, you need to check. Actually, maybe we say, okay, we need less humans, and so we'll need probably humans which are even more trained, because to challenge what AI is getting out after you prompt, or with an API, you put data and you get the answer. To challenge this is difficult. It's we know everybody with the way you get the answer looks very authoritative. And I give you an example. I tested something on some of these AI platforms. I wanted to see if I could automate the calculation of market risk exposure. It's a crucial risk for commodities. Normally, you use specialized systems to do this. You have to code them. It's all coding and getting the data out, where tells you where you are long, short, whatever commodities, so you can you see your risk and take your decisions. I try to see if I can get from the AI. And the first approach was interesting. I was getting some answers, but then you look into the numbers and you do your math, and then was wrong. So, but to challenge these, you need really knowledge. You need to know all these things that works for every kind of risk that you are approaching. This is true, but it's also for AI risk, and to try to manage source of risk through AI. This is what I was doing. I was trying to manage market risk, which is very crucial in commodity business, through AI. And after a while, and after challenging, I was not satisfied. So to close this, what I'm saying is like a business application of AI, which are also not under the radar of the European Union AI Act, can be even more risky and can be even more impacting on the company.
It's interesting you say that, particularly your comment on, I think recruitment is the term you use. So I was reading somewhere that in New York has an act now which prohibits the use of AI for shortlisting candidates, because they found that AI had a bias against women, against people of color, and those are the kind of risks that I think the more this becomes mainstream, and it is definitely becoming mainstream, right? The more it becomes mainstream, the more fuel we pour into this fire, I think some of those risks will come out. Partly, they may be teething troubles that happen with every new technology, right? Cars crashed, planes crashed before they became fairly well regulated and safe. But I think part of it is also that it is just, you know, based on the data it was fed, that data represents, unfortunately, the state of the society, right? The internet represents maybe a sorry state of our society, but it does. And it it is unfortunately baked in those bias and, you know, those kind of proclivities that we are not proud of, or and we won't say unless we are an anonymous person lurking on the internet. There is an interesting question here that I'm going to pose and see if one of you wants to take it. And the question that someone is asking is, what do you think about the very long period of enforcement requirements for high risk system, considering the speed of AI development? And it like, as a technologist, I totally appreciate this question because the tech is moving so fast. Literally every 2 to 4 weeks there is a new AI model, there is new development, there are retrieval augmented generated systems or RAG systems. There is just an incredible amount, trillions of dollars now are chasing these innovations, right? So this is happening at a very, very fast pace. How do you see the enforcement and the governance and regulatory bodies catching up to it? Anyone who wants
Maybe
to?
I'll start, but I think I'm sure Caro would definitely add something. I think
Mm,
when we were young, there used to be some placards on the road: speed thrills, but it kills. So it's about mitigating the risks and it's about identifying if you want to take that risk. And it's the same thing with AI or any technology. The technology does thrill, and we say we can bring in a tremendous advantage or something or the other, but you also have to weigh in the risk it can cause on the other end. So you have to look at both the benefit and the risk and balance out the two. And in balancing out the two, yes, you may feel that the speed is being slowed down or you're feeling bogged down. And also, I see the fear of missing out, that is, my technology would be outdated because I'm serving in a regulated region. But even in an unregulated region, if you dish out that technology which is going to create risk, I think it's a short term game you are playing. So if you look at the long term, then I think you want to mitigate the risk and look for the quality rather than the speed.
I do want to clarify though before Karo you respond. So the question really is that technology is moving at a much faster pace than, you know, than regulations. And you know, in the last, I think, 20, 30 years, this has become far more commonplace just with the advent of internet, cloud computing, mobile technologies, AI, all of that stuff, right? And the question is, how do you, like, would these regulations be outdated, right? Because what you're coming up is not keeping parity with the rate of acceleration of technology. So it's a very fascinating question. And I'm curious, Caro, if you have a perspective on it.
Of course I do. I have perspectives on most things. I'm always talking. So when I said at the start that this is, as legislation, this is fundamental rights and internal market, but it's also product safety. And we've shifted our language now from talking about fair AI to ethical AI to safe AI. So it's gone from be fair to everyone to do the right thing to just don't kill us all. That's really important, that shift in language. I know I'm obsessing about definitions, but it means that product safety is the legal approach that's being taken. And so ISO, IEC, and their joint technical committees, national standards bodies around the world are coming together to try to develop standards for AI systems. And I was at the Alan Turing Institute just the other week, where several standards bodies are trying to work out how you can test and manage and look at how these systems actually work. Are they working correctly? How are they functioning? And so I think those people who are metrologists, who are market surveillance, who are good at conformity assessments, which is one of the requirements for high risk AI, those people are working, our technologists are working on ways to assess and manage this. And those standards will emerge from international standards bodies. They'll also emerge in part under regulations underneath the Act. So you have the Act, and then you've got regulations, technical enabling implementing measures underneath. Those regulations will have more technical detail. They are easier to change. They're easier to update. They're a bit more agile. And the Act itself says it's without prejudice to international standards and international certification standards. So my guess would be that this will shift from a fundamental rights battleground, if you like, to talking about, is this right, is this fair? It will become a more technically regulated space by product safety, market surveillance, metrologists, specialists. And I've met a lot of the people working on the regulations coming from the UN and the resolution, who are working on regs into the AI Act. Try saying that quickly. They're brilliant people. They are technical people. They have a different perspective on compliance and law than, say, fundamental rights lawyers do, or even technology lawyers do. But I think they're the ones who are going to be setting new standards, new benchmarks, and they will be continually updated, and they will be adopted, I think, either under enabling regulations or will become the standard. So a bit like with the GDPR, technical organizational measures taking account of the state of the art and resources, that lovely blanket term that says you do what is best practice and is appropriate right now. I think that's the approach we're going to get. But with AI, it might be slightly more technical in terms of the standards for how you measure these models. That's beyond my expertise, but I've met some of the people building them, and they really are very brilliant. So I think that's how it's going to progress. The standards will be behind, but only hopefully a tiny bit behind the actual tech itself.
That's very insightful. I really like how you phrased it, and I do see, the economic imperative, because as much as we want to talk about fairness and rights and ethics and all of that, when you're looking at the quarter by quarter and profitability, businesses tend to have different perspectives. And I think the fact that it becomes some sort of a product guideline or a product safety related measure brings a whole different degree of scrutiny and degree of enforcement around it. I can see how it may be the way to wield the EU AI stick, if you will, and make sure that there is enough alignment across the board and organizations are held accountable to make sure it is a safe and appropriate usage of these technologies. So very well put. I know we are almost coming to the close, so I wanted to give all of us an opportunity to maybe make one specific recommendation for companies that are starting their AI initiative. And I think I'm going to start with Punit, because Punit, you've been through two sessions today, so I want to make sure I give you the first opportunity to go ahead and summarize what would be your one recommendation for companies that are just getting ready to start their AI initiatives.
Thanks, Saurabh. I think one recommendation would be challenging, but if I have to bundle everything in, start by knowing where the end is. Because you typically say, this is the EU AI Act, this is what I want to do. Or maybe you want to say, I want to follow the AI for Humanity standard from the UN or whatever. Start with an end in mind. Do not start like, okay, I have to comply with EU AI Act. Start with, what do I want to achieve in the long term with my AI vision? What kind of a company do I want to be? What are my goals? What kind of system I'm going to build in? And then work backwards on where does the EU AI Act or any other act fit in, and take a holistic approach. Because as Caro said, EU AI Act is not a silver bullet. You will need to look at a broader solution. This is one element which looks at different dimensions, but there are other things. So look at the end game and build a game plan for that. And one of the things to do that is start to understand what this EUA Act is about, and then you'll be better able to infer what's in it for you.
That's a great recommendation. So begin with the end in mind. Perfect. Alessandro, I'm going to ask you second, and then we'll come to Caro.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be consistent with what I said before. So, in risk management, we are talking about lawyers, IT people obviously are very involved, compliance, HR. My advice is not to leave behind the risk management. The risk management and people, they do risk management. So it's I say that there is a discipline behind, there is knowledge, there is know-how. So companies often they do things in a rush, late, and so on. We said this before. Involve risk management from the beginning. This is a very risk-based strategy should be. In other cases, new things coming and risk management being left apart. We saw this on climate risk and sustainability, ESG. If you talk with many people, they think that the risk management people were left behind. They thought there was no risk there, or I don't know, or they were not the right people because they were not technical. They couldn't calculate scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, gas emissions, and so on. So it's technical, and then the risk management people were left behind. So I would say they should be involved from the beginning in the strategy of each company, and also not companies, organizations, in approaching the AI from a very strategical and structured approach to the matter.
Great, very well put. So don't leave risk management behind, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
No.
All right, Caro, last but not the least, very curious to see what you would say.
I think my overall take would be for companies looking at using AI in particular, don't be scared, but don't be stupid. So don't be scared of AI. It's incredible technology. The things that I have seen, I saw a human heart replica being made the other week. It's incredible. Don't be scared of AI, but also don't be stupid. Involve, as Alessandro said, the risk management team. As Punit says, look at what the Act says. Where do you fall? Are you a deployer, a provider? Where are you at? What are your obligations? And try to lift the lid on the black box. So try to understand what this thing is and how it works and where the supply chain is, even at a high level. There's usually a lot of information out there. If you can understand where your risks are, then do exactly what Alessandro says. Get your risk management tools in place, map them, identify them, map them, understand them, manage them, but think about it in terms of risk, but do think about it. So don't be scared, but don't be stupid either. That's my advice.
Well put, well put. I'm going to add a little bit of my spin to everything I've heard. And like I mentioned, I come from the other side of this story, right? I am working day in, day out with companies that are actually for implementing AI. And the thing that I've found is that very much in line with what all of you're saying is most decisions in life that we make are not perfect. They're not based on 100% knowledge, right? It's always a balance. So I think it boils down to that idea of, don't be scared, but don't be stupid, right? You have to find that balance, seek that balance of, where can you apply AI with minimal risk exposure? How do you balance this and find some, a reasonable degree of value at your business? And when you find that, low risk sort of high return kind of quadrant, then, you have some use cases which are good to do it. And in that balance, like everything else, right? Risk is always about balance, right? It's the eye of the beholder, like beauty, right? So the idea is find the balance. When you think about deploying AI as a business, find the balance between risk, between business advantage, competitive advantage, technology-led innovation, things like that. So, very fascinating discussion, and I know we are right at time. I'm going to turn it over to Punit, our excellent host. And before I do, thank you so much, Caro and Alessandro. I learned a significant amount from both of you today, and definitely have a much broader perspective than what I had about an hour ago. So I appreciate all your insights. And likewise, Punit, thank you so much for having me on this. It has been a privilege. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Caro, Alessandro, and Saurabh. I think what Saurabh said is applicable to me, and I think to every one of us and every one of our listeners. We have gained tremendous amount of wisdom and insights into what we knew about EUA Act about an hour and a half ago and now. And that is what the purpose of these kind of sessions is. And I'm very happy that we had you all and also the previous panel to enlighten us. So with that, I would say thank you so much and have a good day, because some of you have a morning. So I won't say good evening, but have a very good day and see you soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you liked the show, feel free to share it with a friend and write a review. If you have already done so, thank you so much. And if you did not like the show, don't bother and forget about it. Take care and stay safe. Fit for Privacy helps you to create a culture of privacy and manage risks by creating, defining, and implementing a privacy strategy that includes delivering scenario-based training for your staff. We also help those who are looking to get certified in CIPPE, CIPM, and CIPT through on-demand courses that help you prepare and practice for certification exam. Want to know more? Visit www.fitforprivacy.com. That's www.fit4privacy.com. If you have questions or suggestions, drop an email at hello@fit4privacy.com. Until next time, goodbye.